Excellent. All right, thank you guys so much for being here. We're so excited about this next segment of PAC. All right, so for this year's Public Affairs Conference on Innovation, we sought to highlight individuals who bring innovation to life in their lives and work. Our next speaker has forged his own path in the worlds of communication, social media, and activism. Sully Breaks uses his mastery and love of words to spark conversation around topics in need of structural and social innovation. After receiving his law degree from the University of Sheffield, he found himself frustrated with the educational system, and he decided to move forward in a radically different direction as a spoken word poet. His work challenges norms and endeavors to educate and inspire current generations to be courageous, educated, and thoughtful members of the world. Social media, particularly YouTube, has been a catalyst for Sully's ability to build and engage with his established global following. His channel has over 250,000 subscribers and over 12 million views. His most watched video, entitled "Why I Hate School But Love Education," has over 7 million views and has been incorporated into teaching and education curriculums, including classes here at Principia College. Sully has been featured in the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Independent, and Upworthy.com, to name a few, and has appeared twice as a speaker at TEDx House of Parliament. We're thrilled to have Sully Breaks here this afternoon to give his talk and performance entitled "Create the Future." Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sully Breaks.
Let me just test. Can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah, I can hear myself, actually. That's great. Yes. Let me just get a sip of water quickly. Firstly, I just want to say thank all of you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. I'm sure you guys are just happy to cut class anyway. But I really appreciate you coming out. Before I start, just probably 2 pointers. The main one is that, as you might have noticed, I do have a pretty distinctive accent. And unfortunately, I didn't go to school at Hogwarts, so I don't talk as clearly as Harry Potter. And the rest of the people you may associate with an English accent. So if I do get ahead of myself and I start talking too fast, just let me know and I'll slow it down. Feel free to interrupt, but not too much or I'll lose my pace. But yeah, and secondly, I don't have any slides. I don't have any presentations, not because I was too lazy to think of any, but simply because a lot of what I'm going to say and a lot of what I do say is not fact. It's not substantiated by any evidence, and it's not concrete information. You know, what is interpretation? As an artist, what I do is I live life and I interpret it. I is that a word? Philosophize? Is that a word? Did I just make that up? Yeah, anyways, it's philosophy. It's philosophy on how I've lived my life and how I've managed to create the life that I've wanted to live, and how I enjoy living the life I want to live, and how I hope that I have some information that may help you guys, especially at this critical stage in a lot of you younger guys' lives. Yeah, a lot of you guys are freshmen, sophomores, seniors, juniors, right? I got it all right. Oh, cool, perfect. Just double checking. So yeah, the title of my talk is "Create the Future." Create the Future is actually a piece I wrote. It's a spoken word piece. Anyone familiar with spoken word poetry? So only the minority, as it usually is. If I ever want to describe it, I described it like this in Parliament. It's a less glamorous form of, well, it's poetry, but it's in a performance context. So you verbalize it, you vocalize it, and you add emotion for it, so you can translate it in a performance capacity. But in a layman's term, it's just a more less glamorized version of rap. You know, I don't have the chains and the big cars and everything, etc. Just a regular guy. Yeah, so that's what I do, and I write poetry. Now, the concept of the create the future, it doesn't just stem because I was too lazy to think of something. It stems from the philosophy and ideology by which I live my life. I feel like so often, especially at around the ages of 19, we're forced into this traditional linear kind of path in which we're told that we need to pursue. You know, you get into college at 18, and at that point, or even before that, you're supposed to know exactly the right way to go in your life. You know, you're supposed to know what you want to be. And I think it's a very dangerous assumption to make, to believe that life just goes straight like that. And I personally don't think it's true. I think life is a series of twists and turns which you manipulate, I guess it has a negative connotation, but which you curate into what you want to make it. And like I said, I'm a pretty young guy. What do I know about the future? I've watched Back to the Future a few times. That's probably, but a lot of people here are more mature and they could probably give me a lot more insight into it. But like I said, I'm just explaining where I come from and how I did this in my own personal life. Because I started as a poet, and typically, I started studying law. I started university, I graduated, and I finished law, and I said I wanted to be a poet. And typically, when someone thinks of poetry, they think of a starving artist in some pub somewhere waiting to die so their work becomes worth something, you know? Yeah, so I didn't really want to die before my stuff started selling, obviously, because my mum wouldn't allow that either. She kind of invested a lot in me. So that's what I managed to do, and I'm grateful to say that based on that principle, I've been fairly successful, you know. I mean, in my city, I'm a little bit of a big deal, kind of, sort of, trying, you know, like Meg said, about 20 million views on YouTube. You know, right now, we're doing a campaign. In London, there's a campaign for mental health. So if you go on the buses, you should actually see my face on the buses. Obviously, I'm looking a lot less rugged and a lot more photoshopped, but yeah, that's a big accomplishment for me to be able to be a poet and be on that platform. You know, I spoke at the Houses of Parliament. I had a great opportunity to travel around the world in 80 days, just like Phileas Fogg, you know, the book. This is actually true. I'm not actually joking. That's actually true. I traveled around the world, you know, China, Japan, Australia, all these places, you know. And I mean, it's gone really well. It's not that typical structure. I mean, even Will Smith himself invited me to breakfast, and that's a big deal where I'm from, you know. I always say to people, I've never met the Queen, but I met the Fresh Prince, so I'm good, you know what I mean? I'm good. Life goals tick, you know. So I mean, going back to how I've kind of rejected that traditional route, I think it's always important to first identify how it starts and how we fall into the trap. I think it often starts off in maybe you're like 10, 12 years old, and maybe your parents get you a computer. Well, I'm showing my age now. They get you an iPad. In this day and age, you'll have an iPad. My nephew has an iPad. So they get you an iPad, and maybe on iPad you discover iMovie. And you start filming everything, you know, your mum's in the kitchen, and you film your little sister, your little brother, and then eventually you get that movie, you edit it together, you know, it's a really cheesy movie, mum in the kitchen versus brother in the backyard, whatever you want to call it. But then your parents see it, and they're like, wow, this is a masterpiece, you know, you're talented, you're going to be the next Steven Spielberg. So as a result of that, because, I mean, acceptance and validation is one of the most important things we want as a young child. And as a result of that, when you get that validation, your mind is automatically in tune that I'm going to be a director, or I'm going to be the next Steven Spielberg. So then eventually your parents start investing in you, you know, you go to a few courses, you grow up, you go to a college, and you think, oh, that's what I wanted to do. I major in editing or directing, you know. You realize directing's a bit ambitious, so you think I'm going to be an editor, then gradually you think I'm going to be an intern. You know, you get less ambitious as you go along, as you actually have to study it properly, you know, rather than just making your little mum versus brother in the backyard film. So then you graduate, and then you feel, oh, yes, you know, unless my goal is to work with James Cameron on the next Avatar movie. If I don't do that, I'm a failure. And that's the box we fall into. But this time, a lot of the time, when we grow, we've seen so many different things that our passions have shifted. And also, what if there was a fundamental mistake that your parents made at that point? What if you never wanted to be an editor? What if what you enjoyed was putting the story together? What if you wanted to be an author? But we're so caught up in this understanding that once a path is set on us and it's linear, we have to follow it and we have to fit into that traditional structure. But there's a great saying which I often apply to my life. It says that you may not get to climb mountains, but you may get to move them instead. Dreams change. You know, it doesn't make it any less valuable, or it doesn't make it any less relative. It's just that the capacity in which you start to operate decides to change. And it's very interesting because I was having a conversation with Sue Palmer about having kids. Well, I wasn't talking about having kids with Sue Palmer. I was talking about having kids. The phrase I was talking about with Sue. I'm trying to think about. Okay, so I was having a conversation with Sue Palmer yesterday about when you decide to raise kids. Okay, when you decide to raise kids, and the assumption is when we decide to raise kids, we think, okay, I'm going to have kids at this time, I'm going to have kids at this place, and this age, I'm going to plan them 2 years, 3 years apart, whatever is the most popular thing on BuzzFeed at the moment. But the reality is that although we plan this, as she says, the creator ultimately has the decision as to who and when the life is created. So if a process is simple or as natural to us as giving birth or having children, we have no control over that whatsoever, what makes us think we have direct control over the trajectory of our life when there's so many factors that contribute towards where we're going to go? You may be in a relationship, you may make different friends who show you different interests. So I think it's extremely naive to believe that once we have a predetermined assumption of our future at 18 or 17 years old, that we need to pursue it all the way through. Now, I'm not saying you should drop immediately what you're doing and, just go on a road trip around the world. No, what I'm saying is that you need to understand that the innovation in that process lies in your mind being open. Once your mind is closed, it doesn't give you the opportunity to pursue all these different outlets. So just a quick anecdote. I was talking to my sister-in-law, and she's very brilliant at drawing, but she's really detached from school in many ways. She's very detached, and she's not that engaged in the processes of what she's supposed to be doing in school. So I always ask her, what do you want to be when you're older? And she always says, I don't know, I'm not entirely sure what I want to be. Then one day, actually not one day, like last week, she came up to me and she said, I want to be an architect. And that was literally like, whoa, like out of nowhere. I mean, this is the girl who says she doesn't want to do anything, now she wants to be an architect. And I said to her, that architecture is like 7 years. And I didn't say this in a way where I was trying to kill her dreams and none of that. I just said to her, like quite matter-of-factly, architecture is 7 years long. And then her face kind of changed and I thought, okay, you haven't done that much research. So I thought, let me just ask her another question. I said, do you enjoy designing buildings? And she goes, no. So then I thought, okay, I don't want to discourage her like instinctively. So I said to her, what's your favorite building? And she said, there's that tall one, the one near your house, but I'm not sure what it's called. And so I said to her, do you really want to do architecture, or is that what fits most into the frame of someone of your abilities? Because you can draw. And it's automatically, when you say that to someone, they say, no, you can't be a painter, you can't be an artist, because like I said, your work won't be worth anything until you die. And so your mind automatically shifts into that assumption that I'm going to be an architect, I'm going to be a graphic designer. And there's nothing wrong with any of these professions. But what I then said to her is that maybe the job that you want has not yet been created. The world that we live in, the world changing so rapidly. So many of the jobs that exist today, they didn't exist like 20 years ago. Some people are doing the most really random. Some of them are not very appropriate to mention here. But some people are making money of very, very random careers. And what I said to her is that the most important thing is that you work on you. Because when you work on you, when the time is right, these things will happen. When I first started doing poetry, it was weird because I used to go around little circuits and little pubs and all this stuff and perform over and over again, and it wasn't going anywhere. But then as the world started to grow, YouTube eventually became a platform. And I was fortunate enough that I'd invested enough into my craft and my passion that when that YouTube became a platform which I could utilize, it finally became something that I could capitalize upon and create a career or a job for myself that didn't exist. And the most important thing in this element of creating your future, I guess, is to pursue two fundamental and in many ways very important principles. The first important principle is passion. Like, I cannot stress how much it is important that whatever you're doing, you're passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about it, there's no ways you're going to go through the long nights and, the long days and, and people telling you it's rubbish, because it's always rubbish when you start. Sorry, it's always garbage when you start. It's garbage, right? It's not rubbish, yeah. Either way, it's refuse. A lot of people tell you that, there's no way you're going to be able to endure that unless you're extremely passionate about what you do. And the second thing is purpose. If you pursue something that you're passionate about, it's important to pursue it with purpose. I'm not here to tell anybody what their purpose is, but when you pursue it with purpose, what that ultimately does, it allows it to create value for other people. And as David was saying yesterday, when you create value, therein lies the key of anything that you want to do in this life. So the important fundamental thing is we can't get too caught up. I think at 18, what I wanted to do is, obviously that didn't work out. All I wanted to do was be in the NBA. I had this big fascination that I was going to grow to 6'5" overnight, develop muscles and, challenge LeBron and Kobe for the championship. But the reality is that thinking, although it didn't manifest, it allowed me to attain skills which were useful for me later in life. The ability to work in a team, the ability to persevere, the ability to travel through adversity. So eventually, when I started doing my poetry videos on YouTube and I uploaded my first video and it only got 2 views or 4 views, I didn't break down and emotionally say, I'm not doing this again. I thought, this is like when I was trying to learn to shoot, playing basketball. I put up another one. And then you put up another shot and you put up another shot. Then eventually one of the shots hit 7 million views and everything works out. But yeah, that's how it is. And even in that space, the innovation aspect of it, it comes very naturally when you're pursuing something of passion. Because when I started doing the poetry videos on YouTube or spoken word videos on YouTube, outside of very few people, no one was really doing it and it didn't make sense to anyone. But I was so passionate about seeing these ideas and these philosophies and these dreams that I had in my head manifested into a video context. And I did that for many years. I did it for about 2 years. And then there's a guy called Jefferson Bethke, and he was the inspiration behind arguably one of my most popular videos. But all these things happen because I was on a path of passion and purpose. And there's an interesting story I think that can be shared in relation to this, because people say, you often say to people, pursue a path of passion, and they say, but it's never going to work out, I'm not seeing the benefits. I saw an interesting quote on the internet today. It said, find a job you love and you never have to work a day in your life because nobody's probably hiring in that field. But, but the reality is that once you're building yourself, the world builds around you. You create an environment in which your future starts to manifest just because of your belief. And the interesting story that kind of tallies up with this, the interesting story that kind of tallies up with this is a story about a boy, and he goes, it's in a spiritual context. He says to his father one day, he says, why do you always make me read the Bible every single day? Because, I can't commit it to memory. Some of you may have heard any of this story. He said, I can't commit it to memory. I'm not learning. Why do you make me read the book every single day, although I'm not gaining anything out of it? So his father says to him, there's a bucket. He says, take this bucket. It's a filthy bucket, and there's lots of holes at the bottom of the bucket. And he says, take this bucket, and I want you to use this bucket to water the garden. And the garden is like 30 meters down there. So he says, I want you to keep on watering this garden with this bucket for about a month. So the boy tries the first day. Obviously, you're trying to go to the garden. You've got holes in the bottom of the bucket, so the water's seeping through. By the time he gets to the garden, it's completely, there's no water left. So he goes back and forth, back and forth. Every single day, this is a wasted endeavor. He tries to run, but as you run with water, the water leaks out more. So it gets to after the month period, and his father says to him, did you manage to water the garden? And he says, Father, I'm going to be quite honest with you. I tried, but this was a completely wasted effort. What did I learn by doing this? And his father says to him, look inside the bucket. And when he looks at the bucket, what started off with being a filthy, stains at the bottom kind of bucket was completely clean. And he says to him, you see, although you wasn't doing that defined task, what you do every day when you read this book is you're cleaning your soul. And then he said to the boy, you know what? Follow me down the path to the garden. And as he followed him down to the path to the garden, what he noticed is where he'd been running for the past month and the water had been dripping, little plants had started to sprout from the seeds that were there. So essentially he'd grown plants, although he was unwittingly doing so. And I think that is the important factor when it comes to building yourself, pursuing a path of passion, and essentially, in many ways, creating your future. So as I said, there's a spoken word piece that I wrote which ties into that subject matter of creating your future, and it's aptly titled, Create the Future. Very creative on my part, but yeah. So I'd love to share that with you guys. Would that be okay? Cool. You don't have much of a choice anyway, you know. I probably would have been here. Oh, I've got so much time. I'll probably go into another story. Yeah, get a good seat. Make sure you get my good side, man. I saw you pull up the camera. Yeah. Are you good at Photoshop? We'll work. I'll just stay facing this way, innit? Cool. In 1926, Dr. Lee DeForest had the following to say about the future of television. Although technically and commercially it's a possibility, financially it's an impossibility, and a development of which we waste little time dreaming. In 1977, Ken Olsen, founder of DEC, was apparently quoted as saying, "There is no reason why anyone would ever want a home computer." In 1876, Western Union rejected the telephone, saying the idea is idiotic on the face of it, and we would never recommend its purchase. What did Instagram see that Kodak didn't? Because Kodak at its peak had about 140,000 employees when Instagram, with only 13, recently sold for about $1 billion. You know what's funny? The scientists at Kodak actually helped develop the digital camera that would eventually take them out of business. So why, when that was developing in potential, was the company stuck developing pictures? Something you created ends up becoming one of your biggest opponents. Looking back through the timeline, that must have been one hell of a Kodak moment. HMV, one of the world leaders in its field at its peak, they sell CDs, recently faced bankruptcy. And what do you expect? I mean, I don't condone piracy, but one phone call to my friend Jesse and I could probably have the whole of HMV on a USB. I mean, it's 2016. Were they still trying to sell CDs? Are you starting to see what these companies have in common? None of them were crazy enough to believe they could create the future. Because as logical people, we become stuck in our ways, reluctant to change, function the same when there's nothing to gain, forgetting that all skyscrapers were once just slabs of stone. Google was once just scrap of codes. When you look at it from a perspective that's logical, the only true path to your dream is to perceive what others deemed impossible. Because I can bet you right now that it's not too far-fetched that there's a kid in an apartment creating some kind of app that will disrupt this industry and put that job in past tense simply because he's still crazy enough to believe in the scenes that he sees in Star Trek. Because it's only the crazy people who embrace what others tend to fear. I bet Kodak wished they'd had someone standing at the end of the line with a sign saying the end is near. Because everything that you saw on Star Wars and labeled insanity is now a potential reality. Well, except for the lightsaber. But I do have this one idea with a broom handle and a laser. If anyone's an investor and they're watching, we can discuss that later. But all I'm saying is that when we're young, we often start off as crazy. We shoot for the stars. But as time goes on, we start to put our guns on safety. And the scary thing is, we never realize when it's happening. Because a man sent me an email titled, "Why I Hate the Internet." He said he felt the internet was harmful and it was killing human interaction. But he'd seen my video on YouTube and wanted to know if we could discuss it further on Skype. He said I could find more details about his campaign on his website. And I could check his LinkedIn profile to see that he was justified. He ended the email by asking if I could follow him back on Twitter. You see, because this is not just about people's reluctance to take risk in business, but it's also about people's reluctance to take risk in life. But if you look at the world, you see that old ideas saved it, current ones sustained it, but it's the crazy ones that changed it. If you don't change, you don't grow. If you don't grow, you aren't living. So this is my message to you all. It's only contents, a single quote written in italics. Appreciate the past, utilize the present, but don't be afraid to create the future. Thank you very much. Is that? Huh? Oh yeah, cool. Yeah.